or die.
It's 1999, and with the year 2000 just around the corner, the world is bustling in anticipation for the upcoming new millennium. Business and governments are rushing to ensure their computers and databases are Y2K compliant. Uncle Jack has filled his entire basement with canned food, and Honda is releasing a rear-wheel drive sports car? I never thought I'd see the day. So bleach your hair and sit down with your Poochie dog, because today we're traveling back to the turn of the millennium to look at the Honda S2000. Now, the S2000 was not actually Honda's first roadster. In fact, the S2000 was preceded by 3 generations, which takes us all the way back to the very early days of Honda motor vehicle production. There was the 44 horsepower S500, the 57 horsepower S600, and the 70 horsepower S800, the latter 2 of which were also optionally available as a coupe. In 1967, the S800 was the fastest sub-1 liter production car and could rev its way all the way up to 10,000 RPM. The S800 would be sold up until 1970 in Japan and Europe, with over 11,000 produced. Although there were left-hand drive versions of the S600 and S800 built, none were ever officially exported to the US market. Maybe America just wasn't quite ready for 57 horsepower roadsters that could fit in the back of your Vista Cruiser. But let me ask, hey Red, you want to drive a 57 horsepower Japanese roadster?
How about I drive my foot into this thing called your ass?
Okay then. After 1970, we wouldn't see any more roadsters from Honda for almost 30 years, but in 1995 at the Tokyo Motor Show, Honda unveiled the SSM concept car. This concept car was the design study for their upcoming new roadster model, and although Honda hinted at this, the official announcement of a new roadster production vehicle wouldn't come until 1999. As outlandish as the SSM concept car looks, it's not hard to see traces of the S2000 in it, especially when you look at the hood or the back taillights. Now inside there was a pretty crazy cockpit, but probably the strangest thing about it was how the drivers and passengers area were like 2 separate little pods, separated by a little wall, which would make this car completely useless for date night. But inside the driver's pod, there are traces of the S2000 as we know it today, like a digital dash, the red push start button, and oh, what is this?
As if!
Well, I'm glad they fixed that for the production version. I think my favorite part is the digital screen that is just trying so hard to be futuristic. And it literally looks like it belongs in a 90s sci-fi movie. I mean, just look at this. Put in charge of development for the S2000 was a name that will sound familiar if you watched my NSX video. Chief Engineer Shigeru Uehara, who had been in charge of the NSX project and also brought us the Integra Type R, was put in charge once again for the S2000 project. The vehicle would be constructed on Honda's new X-body frame, which aimed to give the convertible coupe-like rigidity and stability. One very interesting thing about the SSM concept is that it had a 2-liter inline 5-cylinder engine. Now those of you that are familiar with the Acura Vigor or the 2.5 TL know that Honda did have production 5-cylinder engines in the 90s, but this one would have been a little bit different as it was a dual overhead cam VTEC as opposed to the production G series engines, which were 2 and 2.5 liter single overhead cam engines. It's very hard to find any information on this prototype engine, and I don't believe any specs for it were ever released. But a few of the shots from this Honda SSM concept promotional video tell us that it was a dual overhead cam VTEC with a red line of about 8,000. At some point, Honda switched to a 4-cylinder designated as the F20C. This 2-liter pumps out 240 horsepower for the North American market and almost 250 horsepower for the JDM market. That's a crazy high horsepower to displacement ratio. But where does the F20C come from? Well, technically it's an F-series, and it's essentially an evolution of the F20B. If you're not familiar with that engine, it was used in the Accord SIR overseas. The F20B is a 2-liter F-series block with a dual overhead cam VTEC head that is very similar to the H22A head. But Honda didn't want to just put the H22 in the Accord SIR because at the time in Japan, engines over 2 liters were subject to extra tax, and Honda didn't want the Accord to fall into this category. Hence the F20B was born. Now the F20C, although based off this, was designed specifically for the S2000 and is a pretty radical departure from previous F-series engines, being that it is chain driven and longitudinally mounted, so at the end of the day it's a pretty distant relative, but it's still its closest relative. And this is why the F20C gets the red valve cover, because it's the highest outputting engine in the F-series family. Now the noticeably narrower head on the F20C was achieved by the fact that the chain does not go over and around the cam sprockets like they do in Honda belt-driven dual overhead cam engines, but instead those sprockets are run off of a third sprocket connected to the chain. Like the H-series, the F20C has fiber-reinforced cylinder walls, and like the NSX and Type R engines, hand-ported intakes. And these are just some of the reasons why the award-winning F20C is still one of the highest output per liter and highest revving engines to date. So January 1st, 2000 rolls around, and the world didn't end, Uncle Jack. And since you got some extra cash after he convinced you to withdraw all your savings, insisting the banking system would be inoperational after 12:01 last night, I think it's time to buy that sports car you've always wanted.
How hot do I look in this, huh?
Your rich snobby friends all think you should be smart and invest in stocks. Cars are terrible investments and will only depreciate, they tell you.
Wouldn't it be cheaper to just stuff a sock down there?
But you don't listen to them, and while they're all out buying Enron stocks, you buy Honda's newer sports car, a rear-wheel drive roadster known as the S2000, because in the new millennium everything was called something 2000. Well, actually the S2000 name is really just convenient timing, because it's really just following the tradition of the previous S-series roadsters that are all named after their displacement. In this case, it's that F20C we just talked about, and this high-revving 2-liter could scream its way up to 60 in about 6.5 seconds, as long as you keep that tack needle above 6,000. That's fine with me, I want my neighbors to hear me coming. Hey Shannon, this is what 9,000 RPM sounds like. Hey, what's this Lexus IS300 Sport Design doing in front of our house? Perhaps even more impressive than the S2000's power is its handling. With its rigid X-body chassis, front and rear double wishbone suspension, and precise electric-assisted power steering, the S2000 cuts through corners faster than Civic owners cut their exhaust saw. A near-perfect 50-50 weight distribution was achieved by the fact that the entirety of the engine block was mounted behind the front axle. But it should be noted that this is a car that takes effort and concentration on the part of the driver to get the most out of it. It's a pure, unapologetic sports car, and definitely not your grandma's Buick. That said though, the interior is decently roomy for two people, as long as neither of you are too tall. The digital dash looks like it was taken straight out of a Formula 1 car, and the push start button is to the left of the steering wheel. Well, how Porsche of you, Honda. Of course you still need to insert and turn an actual key into the steering wheel column before the button will do anything. It's not a proximity keyless unit. Overall, it's a cool looking driver's focused cockpit, and even today I don't think it looks too dated at all. All models were a soft top convertible, although a hard top option did become available in 2001. In 2002, the plastic rear window became glass with an integrated rear defogger. 2002 also added an upgraded radio with separate tweeter speakers, and chrome rings were added around the circular taillights. A subtle but nice finishing touch. Base price was set at $32,415. 2004 was the mid-model run update, and there were some fairly significant changes. The suspension was retuned and there were new wheels and tires. The subframe was updated for even higher rigidity. Cosmetically, there were revised headlamp and tail lamp assemblies, oval tip exhaust pipes, and a slightly different steering wheel. The gauge cluster was also revised, with the temp and fuel readouts now in half-moon shapes instead of straight lines. For those of you that really want to nerd out on the differences, I will also point out that the tweeter speakers were slightly reshaped. Under the hood in North America was now the F20C one. A slightly larger displacement was achieved by lengthening the engine's stroke. As a side effect of this longer piston travel, redline was reduced to 8,000. And while actual horsepower was unchanged, peak power was now achieved at a lower RPM and peak torque output was up by 6%. Gear ratios for the first 5 gears were shortened and then offset by a longer 6th. In Japan, they continued using the F20C until 2006, presumably for the engine tax reasons I mentioned earlier. In 2006, the S2000 became drive-by-wire, which means no more physical throttle cable, and an electronic stability control system was introduced. Inside, there were revised seats with speakers integrated into the headrests. In 2008, the American market received a second trim level for the first time, known as the CR or Club Racer model. I said Club Racer, not Club Ricer. Club Ricer is an unofficial trim level and is an owner-installed option. Good God, he's liable to knock a pedestrian clean off the sidewalk from the center lane in that thing. The CR model was a more track-orientated version of the S2, focusing on lowering weight and increasing performance, although no actual changes were done to the engine. CR models are equipped with fewer creature comforts, AC was optional and the spare tire was deleted. On the outside, there was a revised body kit with a large spoiler and a redesigned front lip. Body color options were Grand Prix White, Berlina Black, Rio Yellow Pearl, and Apex Blue Pearl. CRs also had darker wheels and were available exclusively with a black hardtop. The soft tops, what do you call where it folds down into into, I don't know, its den, was filled in with additional chassis bracing. Club Racer interiors were yellow and black Alcantara. Fake carbon fiber plastic added some extra placebo weight reduction, and there was a peak power output light added to the dash. 668 CR models were produced for the US market in 2008. The 2009 model saw no changes from the previous year and continued to offer both base and CR trims, but mid-year the S2000 was cancelled due to low sales, partially caused by the economic downturn, and only a total of 355 S2s were built for that year, 31 of which were CR models. This makes the total amount of CR models in existence for the US market just 699. Now 15 years later, S2000s are becoming increasingly sought after and are really starting to skyrocket in price. And for good reason. They just don't make good old-fashioned drivers-orientated sports cars like that anymore. I know there are rumors that the S2000 is coming back, possibly as an EV, but for me, this will always be the only true S2. So let me leave you with one final question.
Do you have a Honda?